I'm Magdalena Ball, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land where I am, the Awabakal people, and to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. My guest today is the wonderful Sophie Hardcastle, who joined me recently as part of the Newcastle Writers Festival panel. It was a super fast session, and I felt we only grazed the surface of her wonderful new book, Below Deck. So I've invited Sophie back to go a little bit deeper. Sophie, welcome.
Thank you for having me. And I think I should also begin by acknowledging that I am on Gadigal country, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and want to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Yes, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Sophie, can I just ask you to open the session with a little reading from Below Deck?
Of course. So I am going to read the first chapter of the book. It's very short. It's called Dark Pink. You dying in your 20s is not romantic, he told me, his eyes dense black, half in shadow. He shook his head. It would be a waste. I remember that we were in my living room at the time and that I didn't say anything back, but I thought about it for a long time after. The word waste swirling like an oil slick. I knew he was right. It would be a waste. But when I said I'd die in my 20s, it was never about the romance of it, the old story of the young artist perishing before her time. It was more of a knowing that it was my time. I die on the eve of the day I was born, 29, almost 30. I've always liked the numbers 29, 2, and 9, much more than I've ever liked 30, 3, and 0. 2 is red, and 9 dark pink. 3 is uneasy green and 0 is empty white, but contrary to what you might be thinking, I don't do it on purpose. Not really. Then again, maybe I do. We're made up of myriad choices, aren't we? I shrug, shiver. It's cold here, on the wet stern deck, on the edge of this decade and the next. Beneath me, it is dark, icebergs suspended in the grey. It is all spreading, and I look across at Brooke and she winks, and I smile and it hurts my face. I hold my breath. Do we choose to breathe? I don't know. I still don't know. I wish he told me the answer. I wish he told me a lot of things. Like that when I finally see the green flash, it will be equally amazing and dull. Or that life is a series of words and the punctuation is in all the wrong places, and when you want to take a breath, someone has removed the comma, so you have to take one there, and if you didn't, too bad, it's already gone. Maggie, I wish you told me. At sea, no one can hear you scream.
Thank you so much for that. So I've heard you read that a couple of times now, and it's beautiful to hear you read it as well, because new things come out every time you kind of go back into the text. What I really felt, what came across to me most was this notion of choosing to breathe, which is a theme. It's a theme all through Below Deck, but I think it's also a theme in Breathing Underwater as well. As the title might indicate, this notion of making that choice to breathe, to live, and breathing as a metaphor really for living.
Absolutely. And you're so right. I mean, this is a book about the choices that we make and the choices that we don't make. And this idea, or this sentence that I keep returning to, we choose to breathe, don't we? This came from a philosophy seminar that I went to in Oxford, where the professor was talking about a philosopher who asserted that we are the combination of every experience that has happened to us, and that I am not sitting here choosing these words with these headphones on, sitting in my room, choosing these words, speaking to you, because that's my choice. I am saying these words because of how my reality has been shaped by all of these external pressures, sort of molding my experience of the world over time. And that me speaking right now is the result of all of those pressures. And when I finished the seminar, my friend and I were riding home, and he kind of agreed with it. And I just thought, no, I can't accept that. Like I feel like I want more than that. Like I want to believe that we do have choice and that we do have agency and that we are autonomous beings. And so I began thinking about breathing as a bodily function that we are doing, but we're not conscious of it all the time. We are not, every time I take a breath, I'm not making the choice to take a breath. And yet there are moments in which life can be so punishing that we do have to force ourselves to keep breathing through those moments. And so I think what is most interesting about what happens to Ollie, her experience of sexual violence, is that she makes the choice to participate because it makes her feel like this is somehow less traumatic, because she is taking some kind of control or has some agency in this moment that is so completely devoid of agency. And so, yeah, I really wanted to play with this idea of, if something's happening to you, can you take agency? If something's happening to you, whether you like it or not, does your choice count for anything? And that's really what I was questioning.
And so much throughout the book is Ollie making what appear to be choices, but there's also a real interesting contrast with the choices that are being made for her that she doesn't make as well. The choices that her father makes for her to do an economics degree, the choices that her boyfriend makes for her, the pressures that are put upon her, and how she perceives herself. And of course, the choices her mother makes, which probably shapes a lot of what Ollie feels is the right way to live in this world as a woman.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think her kind of reckoning, or her reclaiming her body is arriving at a point in which she is making choices that are, yeah, I guess like a realization of her agency.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that really fascinates me, so I know you were a professor scholar at Oxford. You went to a lot of classes, including philosophy class, which shaped the book. There's an interesting connection there. But I guess normally, and I know there's a lot of pressure too when you are studying as a scholar at a university, to particularly Oxford, to actually create or write, sort of a nonfiction sort of research a paper of some description, and of course, you ended up writing a novel, which is amazing. It's a kind of an amazing outcome because it's so different to, certainly I know the times are different. I went there 30 years ago, but it's so different to what I felt the pressures were upon me to be kind of hard-nosed and literary, rather than writing with metaphor and writing with imagery, and yet you make all the points that you were trying to make, but you do it in a creative art way. Can you just talk a little bit about what that was like for you to as the result of your scholarship, to actually produce a novel rather than say something more classically academic like nonfiction?
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, I was very lucky that my supervisor, Professor Sir Jonathan Bate, loves novels, I guess. And the scholarship that I had to study as a visiting scholar for a year allowed me the freedom, because I wasn't locked into a syllabus. And I didn't have set what coursework that I had to do. We spent 2 terms doing research tutorials where I was writing essays every week. And then in my 3rd term, I was allowed to do a research project. And so the other scholars who were at Oxford at the same time as me, they all wrote like research papers, as you said, non-fiction, like academic papers. And I asked Sir Bate if I could do a novel instead. And luckily for me, he said yes. And so when I was in Australia, before I left to go to Oxford, my research paper for my visual arts honours degree was looking at the role contemporary art can play in galvanizing environmental activism. And this book set out as being a book about climate change. And because when I was at Oxford, I was researching literature of the environment, and I kept the thing that I found most interesting in literature of the environment and in researching the ways that the natural world has been conceptualized in, certainly in Western thought and in the English-speaking Western world, is like so often women's bodies have been equated to non-human natural world, and so there's this sort of intersection of the way that we think about women and the way that women have been written about by men, and then the way that the natural world has been written about by predominantly Eurocentric, straight and able-bodied men, because that was certainly in like England, that was who was able to write for a long time. That was who was literate. And so, yeah, there's this, I was studying ecofeminism, and so that looks at the parallels between the exploitation of women and the exploitation of the environment. And so I think the reason why I used, why I wrote a book about sexual violence is because I really was writing a book about the climate and about the climate crisis and about the way that the natural world has been othered in a way that enables its exploitation. And so I think readers will hopefully see that someone like Mac in the book, who has the utmost respect for women on board his boats, or on board the Sea Rose, he also understands, probably more than anyone else in the novel, the interconnectedness of everything around him. He reads the wind, he listens to the he listens to the rhythms and the currents of the ocean. To him, sailing is about listening. And then in like the opposite, complete other end of the spectrum, you have the boys, the young men in their 20s on Poseidon, who another boat that Ollie's on, and they are tipping oil into the ocean, and they are, just chucking things overboard, and they really sail in a way that's not about listening. They sail in a way that's about force and control, and that is so much that completely parallels the way that they operate in a space with one woman on board. The way that they treat her body and their entitlement to her body is, matches the way that they think about the world around them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking in particular of that instance with the fish too, where it's a fast and quick way to kill the fish, and they choose the long, slow way, a painful way. There's just completely lacking in respect for anything in the natural world, which is an interesting parallel that you make in the book with Ollie's father, who, is, to me, is almost the clearest cut antagonist in the book. He represents, as the head of an oil company, he represents kind of the ultimate in entitlement, in pollution, in kind of taking, rather than respecting or working with, but just simply, going in kind of without any care at all, and, taking what you feel you want. And that's really an interesting parallel, the sort of Ollie's father kind of at the top of that, and then Ollie's boyfriend, Adam, who also just takes what he wants and doesn't understand any other way, can't see any other way of looking at the world. And, those are sort of the whole notion of having destroyed the earth, which ultimately could destroy ourselves, versus this other way that Mac and Maggie show Ollie, of walking, swimming in the ocean, and using art and viewing the beauty of the world. So yeah, that's a really interesting parallel that you've got going in the book. That's quite powerful.
Thank you. Yeah, I think Mac and Maggie's their function in the book is to show Ollie a very, very different way of thinking about the world around her. And yeah, I think her journey to reclaim her own body is also a journey to sort of reimagine the world in a way that is so incredibly far from the way her dad thinks about the world.
Yeah. And I absolutely love that you were able to actually prove your point about art and as being a response to climate change by actually creating art that is a response to climate change. Well, it's really wonderful that you could do that.
It's
Because
very
I think as
meta.
artists, we often do feel as writers that, should I be out there on the front lines? So it's really wonderful that you were able to actually prove that this is a response and it's a valid one and a powerful one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess when I wrote my thesis in honors, the thing that I kept coming to was this like notion that art moves people because it engages them emotionally. And I think Hugo, Ollie's partner, one of the really beautiful models of healthy masculinity in Below Deck, he makes a comment to Ollie when she's working at the art gallery about how if we were purely rational beings, we wouldn't be in this mess. Yeah, and he awakes or kind of reveals to her how important her work is as a curator, because not only is she deciding whose work gets seen, but she is platforming work that actually does have like a very political agenda, but that is engaging people because it engages them emotionally and therefore moves and instigates change.
Well, you're doing art on so many different levels too, which is really interesting. So you've got language that you're using in Below Deck, but you also create your own art. Is that yours behind you? The picture on the wall?
Oh no. So this is Prue Stent and Honey Long.
Okay.
It's not mine, but I mean I wish it was.
Yeah.
I love their work.
So you're doing artwork as well, which you also did in your with you were artist in resident with Chimo Adventures in Antarctica. What a gig! And also,
Yeah.
that would have been also a critical inspiration for Below Deck as well.
Absolutely. I mean, it was really interesting because I went to Antarctica with Chimo Adventures in 2017, and then I came back and I made paintings. Basically, I used soundscapes of glaciers carving. So I was listening to the sounds of glaciers carving and then painting glaciers in the colors that I heard glaciers carving in. So I was ending up with sort of these paintings of rainbow, but predominantly pink and blue glaciers. And so I think like I interrogated Antarctica and my experiences there for a year before I even thought about how I could write about Antarctica. And so I think that was a really interesting point, or like a really interesting in to talking and writing about Antarctica, was getting to visually explore that space for an entire year before I even thought about how I could possibly put that into words.
Yeah, and I think it comes through in the writing that there is a kind of it almost feels sort of multimodal in the way that you come to the meaning that you're trying to express. You talked about not being, I guess, didactic or heavy-handed in the way in which you talked about the environment, for example. But I feel it's even more than that, because it operates on these kind of visual levels as well as on a semantical level. We feel some of it rather than articulating it. It's not necessarily the head in which we experience what Ollie is going through. It's in the colors, it's in the sounds, it's in the sensations.
Oh, that's very cool to hear.
Do you feel that your art does
Yeah.
that? I mean, do you feel that having these different modes in which you work, even screenwriting, which is, you know, quite different, I guess, fiction and, you know, memoir and all the different hats that you have, including your visual practice, do you find that these kind of coalesce when you're working and inform one another?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they really do feed into each other. I guess, um, you know, the like thinking about if so for instance, like with our series Cloudy River, the TV show that it's now on SBS On Demand, but when my friend Charlie and I made it, that taught me how to be incredibly concise with dialogue, because you only have, you know, I feel like the language that you use when you're in screen writing for screen has to be so, you know, not a single word can be wasted. And so that practice of and that kind of refined writing, um, then when I went back to writing the novel, so Charlie and I wrote Cloudy River in the European summer before I wrote Below Deck. So I kind of had this really intense summer of not only writing the show with Charlie, but then co-directing it. And so that was another interesting thing of like actually dressing a scene, of deciding every single thing that was in this room that we're filming in has a purpose and is there for a very specific reason. And so then I think that both of those things then influenced the way that I was writing Below Deck, because, you know, Ollie walks into a room and I would really think about, well, what does she see and what is in that room that is of significance. And then so the first draft of Below Deck was really short. It was like 47,000 words. And then the part of the editing process with Alan and Almond was writing another sort of 15,000 words to bring it up to just over 60,000. And I think like the reason why it was so short was because I had spent a whole summer writing for screen and, you know, getting very used to having to be so concise. And so I think that practice, yeah, really meant that I didn't waste words. I don't, or I certainly, like, I wasted less words than I ordinarily would have had I not been writing for screen. And then, yeah, absolutely, like my I think with painting, I am able to say things, or explore like landscapes in ways that I possibly can't with words. And then, yeah, and then I guess like where the two meet or intersect, there's very interesting. I think that's a very interesting space.
For sure. And I think that the brevity of all these perceptions, they feel very insular. So I feel like as a reader, you feel like um, you're really in a very intimate space with her in terms of what she's exploring and seeing, because it's not spelled out. You know, we have to think with her. We have to see through her eyes.
Yeah, definitely. And I wanted that kind of distance in the book where we are like, so we're seeing the world through Ollie's eyes, but then there's also it's written in 4 parts and there's huge time elapsed between, yeah, like there's a lot of time lost between each section. You know, every section jumps forward 4 years. And I wanted to do that because I wanted this book to also be about things. It's a book about silence and women being silenced and victims and survivors being silenced. And so I wanted, you know, the book to have physical silences in it, where you also are calling on the reader to participate. I think not spelling everything out, not saying everything that's happened, really provokes the reader to imagine what is filling those silences, or those sort of, yeah, unspoken parts. But then also at the same time, I wanted ambiguity in the book because I wanted readers to think about where is the line, at what point this person crossed the line. And yeah, I wanted people to decide for themselves where the line is, in terms of consent.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not clear cut, really. I mean, it's clear cut who evil is clear cut, I think, in the book. But what's not clear cut is what could have been different. Where do we say yes? Where do we say no at this point? That makes Ollie who she is. But there are little moments too of lightness. I want to point out one Easter egg, since we're almost at Easter, which I loved. It's such a small detail, but that little nod to authors that you loved in the beginning.
Yes, with the books on the shelf in Maggie's
in
apartment.
particular of Brooke Davis's Lost and Found, but that it's really quite fun to see that.
Yeah, I think it's funny. So not only did I do sort of gentle nods to some of my favorite authors and some of my favorite books, but also a few of the artists that get exhibited in Ollie's or in Natasha's gallery that Ollie is working in. Several of those artists are my friends that who are real artists. If anybody ever decides to Google them, they'll find out that they're actually my friends and they make really amazing art.
That's nice. It's a little bonus. Reading list and a viewing list.
Yeah.
So we don't have much time left, but there is a line in your book which has been from the wonderful Maggie, which has been very well quoted, but I think it's worth repeating because it's so relevant to where we are now, and that is this life is a series of happy and unhappy endings, Ollie, but is also a series of beginnings. Never forget that. So I just wanted to ask you, do you think we might be at a beginning? Do you think we might emerge from where we're at in the midst of what is pretty awful pandemic into something maybe that's better?
Yeah, so I actually spoke to Osher Gunsberg about this the other day, and we were talking about the potential in this moment to pause and reevaluate and to move forward in a new and exciting way. That especially when we think about the climate, when we think about power structures, when we think about austerity and cuts to healthcare and to education, all of these things, like this pause that we're having right now, like a global, unprecedented pause. This is a moment in which we can rethink and reimagine the world and how we interact with it. And I think for all the difficulty and pain that this moment is causing, it is also a hopeful thing to think about it, I think, as a new beginning.
Yes. And I mean, even going back to some of the themes in the book, how we relate to the world around us, how we perceive ourselves and what we can and can't take. Because the taking, I mean, it seems, again, going back to Ollie's father, this head of the oil companies and the way in which they approach the ocean, for example, the way in which they approach the earth, the way in which certain types of mining, like coal mining, approach the earth. And the impact that's had on the environment, on the climate, on the world around us. Like I think your book makes this point in very subtle, but also very clear-cut way that nothing is unconnected. The way we treat, the way women are treated, and women's bodies, and the way the earth is treated, and the way the world is treated, and how we relate to one another. It's connected.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that was one quite interesting criticism that I saw from one review, that that I try and apparently touch on too many subjects, or like that I try and tackle too many big issues. And I don't know, I guess like I had to laugh or kind of maybe also step back from that, because I thought, well, how can you speak about the environmental crisis without speaking about race and the way that the global South will be like overwhelmingly and disproportionately impacted by climate change and the climate crisis in the global North. How can you speak about the othering of women without also speaking about the othering of the LGBTQ community? Like all of these systems and of oppression interconnect, and they like prop each other up. And it's the same power structures that enable racism as what enables misogyny, and sexism as what enables like wealth inequality and class oppression, you know, and it's all of these things are interconnected. And so I found that criticism quite strange or funny, that like how can you speak about any one of these issues without acknowledging how they intersect with, you know, a raft of other issues.
And how they're enabled by these other issues. I mean, they're, you know, it's part and parcel of everything.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
I was listening to Bruce Buchani's interview at the Newcastle Writers' Festival, and you know, he raised a very relevant point that, you know, we can't talk about a global pandemic and not talk about how we treat our refugees. You know, we can't separate these things. I mean, we do, but if we do, we're missing the underlying causes of where we are now.
Yeah, and we miss the nuance, don't we? Too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know Below Deck has just come out, and you probably hear this all the time, and it's probably irritating, but is there something else on the cards that you're actually working on?
Yeah, so Cloudy River, the show that got picked up, is like a proof of concept. So that's on SBS On Demand, and we're using that as a proof of concept for a much bigger show. So Charlie and I are working on that right now. And then I am also, I'm hopefully going to start a PhD in January. So I'm doing a lot of the sort of preliminary reading and getting my research proposals together, and that would be in creative writing. So my next novel would hopefully come out of that PhD.
Fantastic. That's wonderful. So where can listeners who, of course, will be desperate now to get hold of your book if they haven't already got it, where can they go to find out more about you?
They can go to any bookstore in Australia and New Zealand, I guess. Any online retailer. I think the Australian Booksellers Association has a very comprehensive list of, I'm pretty sure that's who it is, has a very comprehensive list of independent bookstores that are doing home deliveries. So I think like this is an amazing opportunity for us to support local bookstores to make sure that they all survive through this time. And yeah, so there are a lot of bookstores around Australia are doing deliveries or free deliveries depending on their store to their local area. So I think, yeah, anybody that can support local bookshops and hopefully get the book at the same time is a great thing.
Wonderful. And your website's pretty comprehensive too, just sophiehardcastle.com, isn't it?
SophieHardcastle.com, that's right.
Wonderful. Well, that is all we have time for today, but Sophie, thank you so much for joining me again to talk about your incredible book, Below Deck, and bye for now.
Thank you for having me, Maggie.